You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of our podcast. We have a special bonus episode for you today, post-primary. This is from our Twitter or X space that we did the day after the primary with our colleagues at the Charlotte Observer. So take a listen.
I'm Josh Bergeron. I'm a local news editor here at the Charlotte Observer and joined by some of my fine colleagues here who work both at the Charlotte Observer and the News and Observer. We've got Dawn Vaughan, who's joining us from the News and Observer. And then we've got Danielle joining us from the DMV, and then Mary Ramsey from the Charlotte Observer. Here's a question to start things off. We'll just go ahead and jump right into it. And maybe Mary, will start with you since you've still got the floor. Tricia Cotham wasn't on the ballot yesterday, but in some ways she was. Tell me what the race was in Charlotte that might have had some Tricia Cotham relations, and tell me what the result of that was.
Yeah, this was the race for Mecklenburg County Commission, specifically the 3 at-large seats. We had 5 Democrats running for 3 seats. No Republicans filed in this race. So winners of the primaries will not have to worry about any competition in November. And of the 3 incumbents, the one who did not win was Patricia Cotham, Representative Tricia Cotham's mother. Pat Cotham is a longtime member of the board, long-serving and long-standing figure in the political community here in Charlotte, was the top vote getter amongst at-large candidates for the board in the previous election, but ultimately fell short this time. So we will have a new member of the board come later this year. And
we think, and do we think at all that Tricia Cotham might have had something to do with maybe her mom losing? Was there any name affiliation that might have had some effect there?
That definitely seems plausible. This time around, Pat Cotham did miss out on some notable endorsements from groups such as the Black Political Caucus of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. She was trailing the challenger who did get elected, Yvette Townsend Ingram, in fundraising. Talked to some folks before the election who said that they definitely feel like some resentment within the local Democratic Party infrastructure against the Cotham family over what happened with Tricia Cotham could be lingering. I asked Pat Cotham about this directly before the election. She said that she has dealt with ups and downs in terms of institutional support throughout her tenure on the board, that she felt like she still had a strong base within the community based on what she's done over the years, but ultimately fell short this time around.
Dawn, let's move over to you next and talk to me a little bit about the Council of State elections. Were there any surprises there?
Yeah, so the story of the night really was the Superintendent of Public Instruction Republican primary, where Republican incumbent Catherine Truitt, who had seemed like everybody's endorsement, was ousted by Michelle Morrow, who is a MAGA wing homeschool parent. Again, this is a job where if you win, you're in charge of hundreds of state employees that work in public education. So this was pretty much a surprise. Not that Truitt was primary. Some of it could be they didn't like that she hadn't brought the hammer down quite as heavy on Parents' Bill of Rights enforcement. That's some of what we had heard, but we just assumed that Truitt would skate on through. Another race, again, a Republican primary, the labor commissioner, it was not John Hardister. It was Luke Farley, who's, again, a MAGA Republican. Some of this, I think, could be the fact that, Donald Trump brought out a lot of North Carolina Republican primary voters in his support. So it would make sense that down ballot they would vote for, similar MAGA wing candidates. But Hardister is the House Majority Whip. He stepped down to a deputy whip when he's been running for labor commissioner, but he's been running so long and he has Labor Force One, this car he drives. He seems to be the highest name recognition Republican, a popular Republican, and he lost. And then Lieutenant Governor is always a surprise whenever there's a crowded field. Mark Robinson was a big surprise in 2020. And this time it's not done yet. It's Hal Weatherman is in the lead, but he didn't get the threshold for there not to win outright. And then behind him is Jim O'Neill, whose name you'll know from when he almost beat Josh Stein for Attorney General. And then within 1% is Deanna Ballard, the former state senator. And we can talk more later about runoffs. But a fair amount of surprises. Also, there could be a runoff on state auditor, too. So, yeah, Council of State was probably the most interesting. I think with governor, I'd been knowing for a long time it was going to be Stein and Robinson, but you don't really know until Election Day. Now we all know. So Council of State, for me anyway, was really what I was watching.
As you look out sort of at, the next several months and the next election, what's sort of the first thing on your mind about the Council of State? What are you sort of going to be looking out for? What are some things that you are still going to sort of be trying to figure out and get some answers to as we get closer to the general election related to the Council of State?
Right. So there's a big difference between winning a primary and winning a general election. So if Trump brought out the Republican MAGA wing base voters, and that's who ended up going to the general, that looks a lot different than, sometimes people will move to the middle because they want all that, obviously the largest voting group in North Carolina are unaffiliated. Yes, they vote certain ways by party, but not always. Sometimes, a lot of times you just vote on emotion and feeling, and if you like a candidate or not. All of us reporters would like to say, oh no, everybody votes on policy, but that's definitely not what happens for a lot of people. So that's what I'll be watching. Whoever wins the runoffs, assuming they go to it, how are they going to play to the majority of North Carolinians? On the other hand, it's a big deal to hold a statewide office, but you're still down ballot from the top of ticket, president and governor. So by the time people start moving down the list, it could just be party line. It's really hard to say. So how are they going to get their name out across the state? Rachel Hunt was favored to win her Democratic primary for lieutenant governor. And how is she going to keep it up and everybody else? That's really what I'll be paying attention to. And if some of the rhetoric changes at all, if they're trying to get votes, or if people just double down and then hope it gets them the votes.
I want to move over to Danielle now. And Danielle, you probably already know the question I'm going to ask you about. Talk to me about the 6th congressional district, a very interesting race throughout, and we're not done yet. So talk to me a little bit more about why we are not done yet.
We're not done yet. We have to get a 30+1% finish from a candidate to avoid a runoff. And last night, that race, Josh, you were working with me on it last night, it kept flipping back between former Representative Mark Walker, Trump-endorsed Addison McDowell. We saw Christian Costelli, a former Green Beret, take the lead on it at one point. They were flipping back and forth throughout the night. And finally, Addison McDowell finished off winning, but he did not secure enough of the vote to avoid a runoff. Mark Walker's already announced, he came in second place, that he is going to declare a runoff against him and wants a formal debate with Addison McDowell in front of the voters. So I think we will see a lot out of that district that's already been pretty heated.
So in a minute here, we'll see if anyone who's joined us has any questions. But this is also a special edition of the Under the Dome podcast. So in the Under the Dome spirit, what is your newsmaker of the week? But it hasn't been a full week yet.
Headliner is what we call it, but it is a newsmaker. Sometimes headliner is like whatever the big news is we didn't talk about. Sometimes it's, I don't know, not politics at all. So by the end of the week, my headliner will probably be like, yay, it's basketball time. But my headliner would really be those Council of State surprises that we just talked about. Oh, and actually maybe Durham Democrat Mike Wooder, this long-standing state senator who was ousted in a primary. And that was a surprise. Not that he was challenged, because there was rumblings of that, but that he actually got taken out. So that's my headliner probably. Although when we do the actual podcast people will listen to on Monday, that might be a repeat headliner.
I'll jump in and give it to Greensboro reporters last night, who in the midst of the chaos of the election also had their city manager announce that he is resigning after a ton of controversy that's followed that campaign. And that hit as election results were coming in. And I don't know how they were juggling everything last night and getting things done.
And I'll go ahead and keep it in the Cotham family beat. In addition to Pat Cotham losing in the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners race, you also had Nicole Sidman winning the 3-person Democratic primary to go up against Tricia Cotham in the fall. She got a lot of institutional support during the primary, raised a lot of money. That'll definitely be a race to watch as we head towards November.
Mary, can you tell me a little bit more about Nicole Sidman and just what that race might look like? That might not determine the supermajority, maybe, because there are just so many races across the state. But talk to me a little bit about the dynamics of that legislative election. And Dawn, we'll get you here in here too.
Nicole Sidman is the director of congregational life at Temple Bethel here in Charlotte. She's got experience as a lawyer and an educator. She also ran Christy Clark, the current mayor of Huntersville's campaign for state legislature a few years back, so some political experience there. This race is in a newly drawn district in Southeast Mecklenburg County, which is considered Republican leaning. That being said, I talked to one Republican strategist a few weeks ago who said it's important to keep in mind that while it is Republican leaning, it's not deep red, and that keep in mind the possibility that having former President Trump as the Republican nominee for president could potentially drag Tricia Cotham down a little bit, because while this is a Republican-leaning district, it's not necessarily a Trump Republican-leaning district. So something interesting to keep an eye on there.
Dawn, what else should we be thinking about in the Tricia Cotham race? What else is on your mind in that election?
So she, got all this attention because she was the one, of course, that switched parties. But there's a lot of people in the House. So there's 120 of them. And she was just one of several more moderate Democrats we had been watching last year. And all of them are still in play. Some of them were primaried. And I think the races are still very too close to call. Just looking at the Board of Election results right now for the Democratic primary, Michael Ray is one of the swing Republicans. He has, these are all unofficial results still, but with all precincts reporting 49.82% to the primary challenger, Rodney Pierce, who's at 50.18%. Another close one was Cecil Brockman. I'm trying to pull that up really quick. I don't see that. But anyway, so there were some challengers for others. And Cotham could not be as much of a factor with how things go in the House because of her name and because she made such a big deal last year. Democrats obviously have more incentive to try to take her out in the general.
When we take a look sort of at last night's results, was there anything broader than, we've talked about the Council of State, talked a little bit about one of the congressional races. Were there any other surprises as you were sort of either browsing, looking around at other people's work that you just didn't expect, something that might have been surprising?
I started getting texts last night that County Commissioner in Rockingham County, Kevin Berger, lost. And I did not see that coming because he has a lot of likability out there. He's been well favored on the Board of Commissioners. That's not a county I'm following very closely, even though I have in the past. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. I heard it could have some connection to the casino debate with putting a casino in Rockingham County, but that was something that caught me off guard last night.
I was going to say another close one I forgot to mention. I found the Cecil Brockman. That's within about looks like maybe just over 1%. So a lot of these races are still undecided, but another one that's like very close is George Cleveland, who he looks like the older guy in the movie Up. I'm not making fun of him. He actually has that character on his desk in the House. He acknowledges it, that's his appearance. Anyway, he's kind of the House curmudgeon that questions even those in his own Republican Party. So he may lose to apparently an ECU student. So that was kind of a surprise too in these close races. So once the canvas is finished, that's going to be the decider in a lot, and if there are any thresholds for recounts, and then of course the runoff. So we're not done until I believe May 14th is the date for that if we have it.
Danielle, and give me an update about Brad Knott. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Sure. So Brad Knott was running in the 13th congressional district race. There were so many Republicans running. I believe it was it was either 12 Republicans or 14 Republicans running in the 13th district. And Kelly Daughtry was able to get the most votes in that race, but again, not enough to secure a win and avoid a runoff. This morning, we've been trying to hear from Brad Knott, the runner-up, to find out if he was going to request a runoff. And he has tweeted while we've been on this space saying we're hitting the campaign trail again to secure victory in NC 13 Republican primary runoff on May 14th so that I can fight for you in Congress to secure the border, stop the surge in crime and disorder, and reduce inflation by cutting wasteful spending. So it sounds like we are expecting to go into a runoff in that district as well. So we've now got 2 congressional races heading towards that runoff.
And about runoffs, so you have to request a runoff, and when would those runoffs happen?
It would be on May 14th.
North Carolina is different than other states. Some states there's an automatic runoff. Sometimes there's not, but they actually have a chance to request. So I think that's why we're hearing from some people starting to say today if they're going to have the request a runoff, and others are probably waiting for that final vote tally to decide if they want to ask or not. Plus, it costs more money to keep running. So they're probably looking at their funders and thinking, okay, do I want to mount a campaign for the next, over 2 months here to try to take this person out or not?
Dawn, talk to me a little bit more about the governor's race. What about the governor's race do you think that people are going to be paying the most attention to outside of North Carolina about the governor's race? We'll be obviously based in North Carolina, writing about the things that North Carolina is talking about. Is there anything different that's going to be happening nationally about the North Carolina governor's race?
Statewide, those of us that cover the governor's race are already tired. I can tell you that, the anticipation of all of it. So I wrote a story that was, on the newsandobserver.com, observer.com, a few days before the primary, and then the national media have their versions a couple of days later, looking ahead to how crazy this is going to be. So national people are interested because there aren't a whole lot of governor's races this year, and because of the contrast of Josh Stein, who is a lot like Roy Cooper, and, more like maybe your average North Carolina Democrat. He isn't the same way as Cooper, who, walked the center line for a while and is also from a rural area. Stein is from Chapel Hill and Charlotte. So there's a little bit difference there. He was attorney general. He's still attorney general now. And Cooper was before. Stein also served in the state Senate before. So he's a name that's been in North Carolina politics for a long time. Mark Robinson is the complete opposite. He's obviously more of a firebrand in his speeches. He says a lot of insulting things to a variety of groups on a regular basis, and then complains when the media mentions those things. So he is just going to get more attention in general like that, I think. And because the contrast, because it for national media, it probably makes good TV, honestly, for some of the attention there. There's also a lot of incentive. Both the DGA and RGA, of course, are already out of the gate super involved. But people from outside North Carolina have a vested interest, and obviously their party's candidate, whether it's their own state or not, being governor. And so there's just going to be a massive amount of money coming in. So I think that is what the rest of the state or the rest of the country, I guess, is going to be looking at. And while I have the mic, those of you who are listening to this Twitter space and don't already listen to our Under the Dome podcast, it drops every Monday morning. You should listen to it. You'll hear me, Danielle, a variety of other reporters and guests talk about everything you need to know in North Carolina politics. So we're putting this out as a bonus episode, and then we'll also have one for you on Monday. So all North Carolina politics all the time. That's my plug.
We love it. I think we've got Kern in here now. Kern, could you tell us a little bit more about that North Carolina superintendent race? That was a result that I think surprised a number of people.
Yeah, it was definitely the upset of the night. I mean, Truitt had 8 times the funding edge. He had the endorsements of most of the state's major GOP leaders, from Virginia Foxx to Phil Berger, Jason Sain, Aaron Pare. But probably in the end, the endorsement that cost her more than helped her was Tom Tillis, because when Tillis helped host a fundraiser for Truett, Morrow heavily promoted that as a case of Truett not being a true conservative.
And what do you think happens now going into the general election? Do you think that there are more upsets to come? I mean, I know we're just one day past the primary here, but what's sort of on your mind about the general election?
Well, some of the questions would be, how will Morrow campaign? I mean, I interviewed her this morning, and she's already talking about how she can be a mediator and a peacemaker. So will that cause her to maybe dial back some of the comments she's made up, where she's accused public schools of being indoctrination centers, of being a socialist army for the Democratic Party? So as she tries to campaign general election, is she going to try to in any way move more toward the center, or will she focus on being getting as much of the conservative base as she can, and hoping that that will be enough to win the election?
Thanks for that, Karen. Appreciate your time, and hope you're doing well after a late night last night. I want to move on to Congress. There's a question I wrote down earlier that we didn't get to. I think it might be interesting. Danielle, in 2018, and maybe Dawn might be good to speak to this too, Mark Harris called for a new election after voter fraud marred his campaign. And now he won in a similar part of the state. And he called what happened in 2018 a manufactured scandal. Is there anything that we can gain from that? Is there any thoughts on your mind about that specific result compared to 2018?
I think you and I talked about this a little bit last night, where Mark Harris has been unapologetic for what happened going into this race, and he believes this was a seat that's rightfully his. He thinks he earned it in the last election, and wanted to prove to people that he rightfully is the heir to it, and he got it back last night. Well, he got it back in the Republican primary last night, I should say. We've got, the general to go, but it will likely become his seat. And so he seems to have proven his point to Republicans in that district.
I'll chalk that up as just another surprise from last night. Also, I thought it was interesting that Pat Harrigan over Gray Mills. So if Harrigan and Moore both end up in Congress, considering their interactions previously, that'll be interesting.
And another thing that stood out to me in that Mark Harris race was that John Bradford finished third. Obviously, he's someone who currently serves in the state legislature from Mecklenburg County, is considered one of the more Republican leaders in the county. So it was interesting to see him finish third. I mentioned anecdotally last night to some of us in the office that I had seen kind of a late surge in ads for Alan Bauckham, who finished second in that race, specifically targeting Bradford. So it seems like maybe those made a difference.
And we'll wrap up here with maybe a journalist question or a journalist specific question. So results were coming in a little bit later last night than maybe they had in the past. What did you guys notice about that? Did that seem significantly different from an election observer perspective?
I feel like they prepped us to think it was going to be late, and then it wasn't. So it was actually faster than I thought, except for Wake County, which was really problematic. We're like, what is going on with you? That was my take.
All right. Well, appreciate everyone's time, both listeners and the folks who have joined us. Again, make sure to subscribe to the Charlotte Observer and the News and Observer. We'll have lots of great coverage from starting today. Starting today, we'll have stories running all the way until November. Listen to Under the Dome, great politics podcast posting on Mondays. And you'll have to see if it's the same headliners of the week when that edition posts, if there are any different headliners of the week.
I'm Dawn Vaughan. Thanks for listening to this special bonus episode after the primary of Under the Dome with our colleagues at the Charlotte Observer. We'll be back as usual, posting Monday morning with more post-primary news and looking ahead to the general and everything else in North Carolina politics. For the News and Observer and Charlotte Observer, I'll talk to you next time.